Hello and welcome to another Thursday night live Q&A event. I'll introduce you to my colleagues in a minute, but first of all we just need to go through a little bit of housekeeping. So our team will offer advice and guidance on the questions asked, but our guidance will be limited by the extent of information which is provided in the question. We do not assume any liability to anyone for any loss or damage caused by an error or omission in any advice or guidance given, whether such an error or omission is the result of negligence or any other cause. If we do make reference to any legislation, it can't be considered as legal advice. And most importantly, individuals must rely on their own skill and judgment when making use of any guidance offered. So, as I said, really pleased to introduce a couple of good guys. Stuart Kershaw from Area Engineer. So we've got the whole of the UK covered, I believe, tonight. We've got Stuart from the north. How are you, Stuart? How's your day been so far?
Very good, Sam. Good evening. Yeah, had a good day today. Assessments in Yorkshire and over to Manchester to look at work. So enjoyable day. Yeah.
Brilliant stuff.
Yeah.
And Keith Moss, how's your day been, Keith?
Yeah, good evening first. To say to everybody good evening. But it's been good, Sam, actually. A couple of good guys today down in the south that we've had, down in the Brentwood and Upminster area. So it's been very, very good.
Yeah. Okay. As this is the first Q&A event after the publication of Amendment 4 on the 15th of April, we want to try and have an Amendment 4 focus, but if you've got a question that is outside of Amendment 4, please do put it into the chat and we'll try and get round to answering that as well. But we do, if possible, want to try and prioritise the Amendment 4 ones, so we'll take those. We'll go through a few questions that we've had in through social media and also to the technical helpline that are around Amendment 4 to get the ball rolling. But yeah, if you've got any questions, please do put them into the chat. Great opportunity, and we'll do our best to answer them tonight. If we can't answer them tonight, we'll take them away and get answers for you. So without further ado, we'll start off with the question that we posted out earlier in the week for our question of the week, and it was, what's the current carrying capacity of 2-core 6mm 70 degrees C thermoplastic SWA that's got copper conductors and it's buried in the ground? It's installed in ducting which is in the ground, and that's quite a key thing. If we just have a little look, I had a look earlier in the day as to what people had thought of that question so far, and we can see we had about 1,200 votes around lunchtime today, and 36% of the people went for 36 amp and 32% of the people went for 46 amp. What's our answer there, Stuart?
The answer, Sam's 46 amps, which comes from new amended table 4A2, where we've now got a demarcation between cables buried in the ground and cables that are buried in ducting in the ground. So we've got now new reference methods D1 and D2 for these reference methods.
Yeah.
So we can see in table 4A2, we've now got columns 70, 72 and 73 referring to these D1 and D2 methods of installation. Yeah. Which has then triggered the change in the table for D4A. So we've got now the two columns there for single phase and three phase of those reference methods D1 and D2 mirrored in there. So we're looking column 6 for the 6mm cable, referring to thermoplastic, look across, and it's 46 amps.
Yeah, so like you say, it's an addition in the Orange Book in Amendment 4 2026. It's something that had always been around in the HDs. They always had two separate current carrying capacities based on the different installation method, but we only had a combined. If you look down the columns, there's not a huge difference, but it might make a sizing difference. Certainly when you get to the larger cables, it might mean that you don't have to go up in size. So yeah, just become familiar with it. Of course, it's not all cables, because not all cables are acceptable to be buried directly in the ground. So it is only those ones that can, like SWA. But yeah, a great start and a great pointer straight away into some of the things that have changed in Amendment 4.
There's other factors to consider with respect to cables that are buried in the ground. Current kind of capacities, but it's probably outside the scope of this tonight. But soil resistivity, the temperature of the soil and all the rest of it,
yeah,
which needs to be considered. Obviously, needs to be considered from design perspective.
Absolutely.
The problem with that is as we know, it changes seasonally. So, but yeah, it's another change that's clearly defined, isn't it, with the different reference methods now. Yeah. Tied into it.
Okay, so that was our question of the week that's out on social media. Looking at some other commonly asked questions. First one up, if an installation has been designed before the 15th of October 2026, can it still be signed off to Amendment 3 after this deadline? So a common question we get, because we know that there will be many projects that have already started and they may not be completed until after the 15th of October, which is when Amendment 3 will actually get withdrawn. So what's our thoughts there, Keith? Can we actually complete it to Amendment 3 after the deadline?
The simple answer there, Sam, is yes. If the work was started before October the 15th, then it can be completed and certified under Amendment 3 to 2024. But what you need to consider is expectation of what the customer is expecting. If they're expecting the work to be completed to the latest standard, or there's insurance implications on it, that it needs to be completed to the latest standard, I think we need to make sure that whoever's designed something and it's going to be certified under the Third Amendment, but the Fourth Amendment is then out, they need to take that in consideration. So as reasonably, as practical as possible, get in touch with the person you're working for and explain if the Amendment 4's out and you've got any changes that be indicated in the work that you're doing, then just see what the customer wants to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So it as far as 7671's concerned, so long as you certificate it to the version that you've designed and installed it to, then you're 7671 compliant. And if you're 7671 compliant, then we, the NICEIC, are happy. But it's just the case of its customer expectation, its contract, its other interested parties. So yeah, check, and our best advice really is have that conversation now. Don't wait until the end, and then have the customer ask, well, why haven't you done it to the latest version? So
yeah, because there could be something in there that a licensing authority might be insistent on, that they require it to the latest edition. So just be careful if anyone's out there doing that.
Yeah, definitely. You'll be aware now when you're going to be completing the work, so have the conversation now rather than wait until October. Another one that we're getting asked an awful lot, do we need an 18th edition Amendment 4 2026 qualification? What's our thoughts there, Stuart?
The answer, no. No, it's obviously an amendment, Sam, so there'll be no requirement to, although, an updating of knowledge course that some will be offered, NIC will probably be offering, would obviously be beneficial, but the key thing here is the EAS document requirements to continually update knowledge, carrying out CPD. So as long as we're QSs and contractors are making themselves familiar with the changes in Amendment 4, there's no requirement. I think if it's a City and Guilds qualification, contractors hold, it will be a 2382, and it'll either be a 2382 18, 22 or 24, depending on when they did it. So there's no requirement to redo the 18th edition qualification. The key thing there is obviously updating knowledge and continued professional development, which I'm sure you'll be busy with wire on demands.
Yeah.
Webinars, that's one way of doing it.
Yeah.
And of course, other sources of information, and something that we always encourage guys to do is actually look at the changes in the book and familiarise themselves.
Yeah, and we are, we do have both online, virtual, and classroom courses. We're running them already. We actually ran them almost straight after publication, and people are getting benefit from those. So yeah, it is a great way to do both an introduction to the changes and also complete CPD, which is a requirement, like you say. But yeah, if you've already got an 18th edition qualification, there's no qualification requirement to update it. But yeah, there may be benefit, in particular if you're working in some of those areas that have been greatly affected by the changes. Okay, please do put your questions in the chat. I can see there's a couple in there already that we'll get to, but please do, if you've got some questions, as I say, Amendment 4 or otherwise, stick them in the chat, and once we've gone through these questions that were held over, we'll get round to those. So next one. Yeah, this is a good one regarding the change. So, do I need to install AFDDs to protect an EV charging equipment because it's got socket outlets rated at 32 amp and it's outside a HMO or a high-rise residential building? So, do I need to fit AFDDs in those instances, Keith?
No, you don't, Sam. No, and the clarification has been provided in Amendment 4. Is a regulation in Section 722, which is the EV charging regulations. It says 722.421.1.7201. AFDDs are not required for circuits supplying EV charging points in those requirements in a high-risk residential building. So it sort of contradicts itself a little bit with the 421.1.7 where AFDDs are, but it does say in Part 7 of BS 7671 supplement or modify the general requirements contained in other parts of BS 7671. So it doesn't need it, no.
Yeah.
And all I would state on that, if the licensing of the HMO, they may require that all circuits in some HMOs are required to have AFDDs. They do sometimes go up and beyond the single socket outlets, or socket outlets, sorry.
Yeah. So that's a sort of a contractual requirement, as you say, which 7671 is a minimum. The contract or the customer request might always go above. Yeah, this is an interesting one in that it was never the intent, because one of the drivers around AFDDs was people being woken and then having issues with evacuating a building, perhaps due to unfamiliarity if it was a small building, or due to time if it was a large building like high rise. And so AFDDs were brought into 7671 to cater for those instances, but it was never a requirement, or the intent was never for the vehicle charging equipment, which tends to be outside and therefore wouldn't have the same perceived risk of preventing evacuation as a fire inside would. So yeah, it's a really good point. That again, it's a good use of the update. It provides additional clarification where there was a bit of confusion and question. And yeah, it's a real key thing that although a requirement might be in parts 1 to 6, it can be then changed or flipped back the other way by a requirement within part 7. That's the whole reason why part 7's created, for those special locations and special installations that do require a different tack from the general, which is covered in parts 1 to 6. Another one to do with one of the changes. So 7671 Amendment 4 2026 introduced for the first time an earthing system, TNCS PNB, and we're getting asked a lot, how would a contractor, an engineer, identify that the installation had a PNB earthing system? What can we say about that, Stuart?
Well, this is a welcome thing for me to see included, the PNB arrangement. Visually, it would be difficult to see from a visual identification at the origin of a lot of installations. If it's a recent addition or a newer supply, you may be able to see that there would be a sticker or a label put on by the DNO, possibly. We would obviously the inquiry to the DNO under the ESQCR regulations sound obligated to provide you with information about the earthing arrangement for the installation free of charge. So obviously that's one option to know whether it's PNB or not. And the reason for PNB is that we're saying that in some properties or fed from a small, maybe a pole mounted transformer or something like that, where it serves 4 properties or less, then there would be a chance that it could be PNB, and you would be able to reference the Energy Network Association's G12 document that tells people more about it. The pertinent parts of that in that document are 3.15 and 4.11. It states in the document that the PNB may be adopted if the number of consumers is 4 or less, and a distance of 40 metres or less from the transformer or the substation that serves those properties. But rather than being multiply staked, like a protected multiple earthing network, where the pen conductor should be staked, distance-wise, I'm not sure on that. Do they state 100 metres or a distance of 100 metres where it will be regular, staked at regular intervals?
Yeah.
It may be staked away from the high voltage earthing network and more local to the just outside of the consumer's installation.
Yeah, so that's one of the indicators for PNB that the
so could identify it possibly, but
yeah, because it'll have that single point of reference to earth, and it should be, the guidance to the DNOs is it should be as close to the consumer's terminals as possible, and certainly 40 metres or less. So that's one thing that might tell. But as Stuart said, if in doubt, it's a query to the DNO, and the DNO, that's the information that they must provide free of charge. So
which in practice sounds difficult sometimes to obtain.
Yeah, I used to always, once I had the name of a helpful engineer, I never forgot that name or that phone number, because
I've got one. Got one for Northern Power Grid myself, and but yeah, there's other things in the Amendment 4. There's an introduction of a figure 3.9b that shows PNB. This is part of Regulation 312.2.1.1. The diagrams in Part 3 that show the TNS-TNCS arrangement now shows a diagram of PNB, shows the DNO's earth just outside of the consumer's installation. And obviously the ANA guide that I mentioned earlier, the pertinent part's been 3.15, 4.11. And interestingly, it's something that was overlooked that we were talking about the other week with a colleague of mine about 411.4.2 for TN systems. It's still there in the regs and it's in the new book, with the recommendation of us installing an additional earth electrode, which is another interesting one that they were implemented or recommended. And it says recommended, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we should be encouraging the contractors to hammer rods into the ground near the origin myself.
I'd agree with you.
It's there in the book. It's there in the book, isn't it? That it's is that something we should be recommending with guys who don't carry CAT scanners, who aren't trained in that? And it's probably not too good an idea.
Yeah.
You know, if there's an earth terminal provided by the DNO, then it's their duty to maintain that, in it, under the ESQCR regulations. It's always been the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, if somebody is considering installing that additional earth electrode, then our advice is strongly to have that conversation with the DNO, because you know, they might not actually want you to have any input into their earthing arrangement, because, like you say, they have to maintain it based on that that statutory requirement in the ESQCR regs. So it is their responsibility. The other thing on this, a little bit of an aside, is we're being asked as well that if it is PNB, do PME requirements apply? So, for example, do they need an open protector on an EV charger, and do they need to upsize the bonding conductors? And the answer to that is no. You know, that there are specific PME requirements within BS 7671, but they're not the same if we've got a PNB network. So yeah, you don't need to apply all of the PME considerations if you know that it is a PMB. So that's something to consider, because it could be advantageous if we have got a PMB.
Definitely. And it's basically earth outside of the consumer's insulation. I suppose that length of cable shorter, so the rate of rise for the voltage to true earth would be reduced. Or is that the premise behind that, do you think?
Yeah, and I think the fact that it's limited to 4 consumers, so the perceived risk isn't as high if you lose the neutral. Yeah.
Sam, I think the extra earth rod as well is really a consideration if you're going to go into island mode more than anything else, isn't it? So normally you think maybe that would only be new builds, so you might have the facility to put an extra earth rod in, or a earth rod in, to supplement the other system, if you're going to use the disconnection relay for going into island mode.
Yeah, spot on, and that's actually come through in one of the questions tonight, which is also spot on, because there's a statement, isn't there, that if you are doing that in a prosumer installation that allows you to go into island mode, you're not allowed to rely on the DNO earthing arrangement anymore, because you may
that's in the code of practice in electrical energy storage systems, isn't it? The requirement for if you've got a grid connected or a grid tied type gateway and a battery, that you must install a supplementary electrode for that. So it's much more prevalent, like Keith says, on new builds and stuff like where they are, as a matter of course now, to meet SAP requirements. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? But especially if they're installing PV and EES in new build properties, then that might be the requirement. But again, exercise with caution to the contractors out there, because
absolutely.
Okay, another one. So this is to do with one of our new sections, section 545, and we're again quite a common question we're getting. Amendment 4 2026 requires functional bonding conductors to be pink. I'm having difficulty sourcing pink cable. Can I use another colour? What's our thoughts there?
Yes, you can, Sam. You can use another colour, but you can't use green and yellow. So you can't use what would be the obvious thing that you might want to be using, but a separate colour, anything but green and yellow. What we need to do is then indicate it at the terminations as pink, and we would also say throughout its length, wherever it can be visible, to indicate it as that colour. So a suitable colour cable. It'd be nice if it didn't match any of the others as well, but that might not be possible either. But whatever If you, for example, if you use the black one, you would then indicate it pink at both ends of the terminals, and somewhere else it was visible. If it was along the tray, you could then put some pink tape on it or a pink oversleeve.
Yeah, yeah, and it's one of those instances where it has to be identified at each of its terminations, and the regulation says preferably throughout its length. So that's what enables us to use a different colour conductor, and then just label it. And then, like you say, the other thing that we're not allowed to do is use the colour green and yellow. So we can't oversleeve a green yellow conductor, because obviously that's associated with electrical safety or safety earthing or safety bonding.
We've got some pink sleeving kicking about, but I've not seen. Funny you said that, Keith, because I've not seen any pink insulation tape for sale yet.
You will do.
You could be onto something there.
You get some red then and leave it out and get it a bit of solar gain on it. It'll turn pink soon enough.
Yeah, get it in some UV light. Yeah.
Okay. Another new part of 7671. So, do I need to meet the requirements of PAS 63100 in order to comply with BS 7671 for battery storage? So do I have to follow PAS 63100, Stuart?
Again, you're doing due diligence under health and safety, under the guidance, and PAS 63100 has been published with input from a number of people, but obviously is by the BSI, so it ties in with that and following manufacturer's instructions. It clearly states, in 63100, that it's definitely recommended that the battery storage systems are located externally and not within a dwelling where possible, and they are separated from habitable rooms and any means of escape for inhabitants, and by suitable fire compartmentalisation. So I guess if we're talking about domestic dwellings, then going back to our conversation before we came on the call, was it's something I've never liked, seeing batteries in lofts. It's a bad idea. So yeah, if it's not a domestic dwelling, there might be a fire risk assessment in place where it's been discussed and it can be agreed upon that they be located. But where possible, I would suggest under PAS 63100 that we should be following that guidance. And most of these electrical energy storage systems are suitably rated, external influences wise, IP67 ratings, etc. So they can be installed outside externally.
Yeah. Yeah.
If we're going to have to install them internally, I've got a battery in my own garage, but it's on an external wall, and it's mounted on some fire rated board, and there is an interconnected linked smoke detector compliant with BS 5839 Part 6 in that vicinity as well. So it's taking suitable precautions, but it is advised against in PAS document.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were one of those people. So the BSI went out to and it was one of the government departments also to get industry bodies together to produce the PAS, and it's just a quicker method of getting information out to the industry. It can in future time, it may become a British standard itself, or all of its requirements might get taken into a British standard. So it is one of those things that can become a standard. But at the moment, it is just a PAS. It's freely downloadable. Anybody can download it from the BSI website. It's not a huge document. It's about 25 pages. We, the NICEIC, were one of the organisations involved in its development, and yeah, we are a supporter of it in that, that we believe that the best place for those storage batteries is outside the dwelling and certainly away from habitable rooms. And as Stuart says, that the manufacturers are actually working to make that easier by getting their product which is suitably rated for outside, and then there are other manufacturers that will do outdoor equipment, enclosures, covers, etc. to help with that process too. But yeah, we're a firm supporter. There are instances, you know, we get the common situation is the terraced house where you haven't got the distances from doors and windows because the batteries do during normal operation emit some fumes. So we know that it's not as easy as putting it on the outside wall in every location, and in particular the older terraced houses can create an issue with their characteristics. But yeah, in general we would always suggest, and it's in there just like manufacturer's instructions. It says take account. So you know, if you're going to follow BS 7671 and you've taken account of PAS 63100 but decided to not do something that it recommends, then you know, in order for you to say that you've complied with 7671, you'd have to put some rationale for that.
It's fairly low frequency battery fires. I would say it's looking at some figures online, and it's not if there is a battery fire, and they're not extinguishable very easily, and it's like you say, these locating them outside now, there is a lot of purpose designed compliant compartment things that you can house them in to give them some weather protection, isn't there?
Yeah,
that you mentioned, Sam.
Yeah.
I was looking at some for a job the other day actually, which entirely suitable, and the whole installation there, the inverter and the separate board for the installations, all to be located in one of those at the side of the house, nicely out of the way in case there is any issues.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, please do put. We've got a couple of questions in the chat that we'll get to, but we'll welcome more. So that we've just got one more that was held over that we'll go through, and then we'll answer the questions that have come through in the chat. So last one of the questions asked pre-event. Why has the definition of a skilled person been removed from part 2 definition 7671? This is a good one because I felt the same initially, but what's the answer there, Keith?
Well, it hasn't really, Sam. It hasn't been removed. It's just been moved. In part 2, the terms and conditions has been renamed as terms and conditions, and the associated terms for that, for skilled persons, instructing persons and ordinary persons, have just gone under the letter P. Same things have happened, I think, with battery storage and with medical locations. They're all under a single letter, not separately. So you won't get ordinary persons or skilled persons, all under persons. P for persons, you'll find them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And P for pink, for your pink tape as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it fooled me because I thought that they'd dropped it and didn't understand and was asking the reasons why, and then got told no, we haven't dropped it at all. But yeah, they've just rearranged things. So you'll find everything associated with battery is under battery, everything associated with persons is under P for persons, everything associated with medical locations under that. So yeah, just have a look. It's still there. It's just moved. Okay, let's have a look. Some of the questions coming in. One that again is a common one. Somebody's asked, what's the difference between an RDC DD and an RDC PD? So if I have a crack at that first, great question. So in the Brown Book, we had the RDC DD. So we had a detection device which you could use in conjunction with a type A RCD or a type F RCD to provide you detection of greater than 6 milliamps and then disconnection of supply in our EV charging installations. So each charge point had to be protected by an RCD, either type B or an A or an F with a DD. Now we've got a third option, so we've still got those two options, but now we've got a third option of a device, an RDC PD, so a protective device, the PD at the end. So it's got the same DC detection characteristics as a DD, but it's got the ability to disconnect itself. It doesn't need an alternative device. So if you are using RDC PD, you don't need an RCD for protection of the charging point. Now these devices have been around for some time. If you look at the standard to which they're manufactured and tested, it's 2018, and they were specifically developed for mode 3 vehicle charging. So it may well be that that your chosen EV charge equipment manufacturer already uses these. So if that's the case, then you don't need to go down the road of a type B or a type A or F with a DD. It gives you a third option now, and it's one of those things that it was already there. It's not a new piece of equipment. As I say, these things were being manufactured in 2018. It's just the first time it's appeared in 7671, and it's in both the electric vehicle charging special location 722, and it's also in the table for selection of protective devices with regards isolation, switching and protective device. So 537.4 that tells us what devices it can, and if you look in there, it's suitable for all. It can be used for isolation purposes, emergency switching and functional switching. Would you guys add anything to that?
Yeah. Sam, just a couple of little bits if I've got there to add to that. You may still need an RCD up front, depending on what your cable installation methods are. So if you've put a twin and earth, for example, in the fabric of the building, and it's in a domestic or whatever installation, then that's going to need an RCD to protect that cable going to the device, to the EV charging point. And also there's a beamer guide that mentions the PD device, that it says it's going to have a manual reset onto the RCD of that. So where there was the DD device, which didn't have a manual reset, this one's going to have a manual reset. So it's just where that's going to be sited. Not too sure at the moment whether it's going to be on the outside of the EV charging point, or there's going to be some sort of electronic reset on the front of it.
Yeah. Electronic means is some of the devices, I believe, without stating any manufacturer names, Keith, there's an app that you could test the RCD, the electronic RCD internal in the unit, and the RDC as well, because that's another question we're getting asked by contractors. How do we test these devices? Well, to a British standard IEC 62955, and it's in appliances, the unit, really. So when we come to doing the tests, we have to do the proprietary tests as the BS 7671. And as you know yourself, you'll get contractors showing you the fancy bits of EV test adapter kit that the various test equipment companies are selling. Is it necessary or to test this device? Well, no, it's like this question about testing SPDs.
Yeah.
No. It's not required under 74 to do these tests. That's something that we're getting asked quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a really good point. That as far as 7671's concerned, it's selection and erection. So is it the right device? Has it got the right British standard? That's as far as we need to go. And I think the other thing is that it hasn't helped that it's got a very similar acronym to an RCD. So people are thinking, well, is it a different form of RCD that I can test? No, it's not. And you've got to go back to your cold winter night sitting in the classroom in theory. We're talking about a DC protective device. our RCDs don't work with DC, because with DC we don't get an alternating magnetic field, and we don't get a sensing coil that can tell the difference. So although these sound like a form of RCD because they're an RDC, they're not. They operate in completely a different way, and they don't have that sensing coil that we're used to in an RCD, where it's got the line current and the neutral current, and it senses the difference. That's not what's going on. This is electronics, which is detecting that 6 milliamp or greater DC current.
So in effect, it's protecting the equipment and the tether lead, isn't it? It's not protecting before the EV charging point, is it?
Yeah.
And going back to what Keith said about how the reference method of the installations, if they've used, I don't know, a non-armoured cable, like you said, and it's running the fabric of the buildings, an RCD required there for other reasons.
Yeah.
You know, so that's fundamentally, and I remember that one company did a U-turn on their advice, on their manufacturer's advice, and changed it online with respect to them saying that their RCD, electronic RCD within their charge point, met all the requirements of relevant standards. And it was highlighted to them that it didn't really, because they didn't have a manual for means of being able to test it, like a test button on.
Mm.
Some of them did have. Some had a little flap underneath, and it was pretty much an RCCB or an RCBO device under a flap that you could press a test button on. But a lot of them had the electronic version, and so they did a bit of a U-turn on their advice, and then started saying that an A-type RCD was required.
Yeah.
At the origin.
We've got one that's come in, which is quite an interesting question. I might have to read it a couple of times. So, if DNO consultation is required before adding an earth electrode to a PME system, why is it not normally required when bonding extraneous conductive parts such as metallic gas or water services, which also create a parallel path to earth? I understand additional earthing may help reduce touch voltage in the event of a neutral failure. So I think that's in reference to when we were talking about the recommendation for an additional earth electrode. I think it's 7671 doesn't specifically say DNO consultation is required, but our recommendation would be to involve the DNO. And I think that's because you're providing that dedicated path for both fault currents and any other currents that might be in that vicinity of the installation. Yeah, it's a good point. I think the fact that we've got extraneous conductive parts through metallic gas and water services is something that's there that we're not adding to. So I think that's really the reason why we're suggesting to we're recommending to contact the DNO if you are going to provide that additional earth to a system, because it will affect the earthing arrangement. Okay.
And also with that in mind as well, with other issues of diverted neutral current, which has been highlighted now in guidance note 3 as part of safe isolation, and things to look for with PMEs when carrying out safe isolation. Sam, checking very carefully that we've not got any signs of diverted neutral current.
Yeah.
Which in which case we'd be contacting DNO straight away about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Got a question from one of the engineers tonight about statement is they're coming across a lot of poor EV installs with 10mm tails and 6mm earth to the EV board from Henley blocks. I've had a customer challenge a contractor. NIC have told the contractor to rectify with a minimum of 16mm on an 80 amp fuse. Why is the NIC not addressed this despite it happening daily? So it is something, and you know we have been involved. We were involved in one of the OLES audits of domestic vehicle charging installations. it's one of the things we identified. We've put out a lot of guidance. We had a connections article that was dedicated to this issue. All I would suggest is, if you've seen it, then encourage the customer to get in contact with us. Because if the NIC contractor isn't coming back to rectify it, then the customer should register that with our consumer complaints team, and we'll get involved. Certainly we saw a lot of instances where we might be okay for overcurrent protection because we can confirm that it's a fixed load that's not going to draw anything, but it's, in particular, we're looking at ensuring that we've got short circuit and earth fault protection for those smaller cables, because if we are relying on the D&O fuse, then they have to agree to that. So there are some requirements, and it's actually one of the things that has driven another one of the changes in Amendment 4. So if you do look in Amendment 4 now, you'll see this phrase, inherently short circuit and earth fault proof. And this is one of those reasons, because previously the regulation just talked about minimising faults but didn't specifically mention which type of faults. So again, the NIC were instrumental in sort of tightening that requirement up, and that was really one of the drivers around that. So yeah, it is something that we're hot on. We do look, if the NIC contractor involved that did the install isn't responding, then encourage the consumer, the customer, to get in contact with us through the consumer complaints team, and we'll get involved. Yeah, we've not had. I thought we'd get a lot. It's one of those always surprising Thursday night Q&A events. I thought we'd get a lot more. I thought people would have had a couple of weeks now to get their head inside the orange book and come up with a lot of questions. But yeah, we've gone through the ones that were there. Have you guys had questions that you've been asked in your day-to-day jobs?
Yeah, we've had a few. The AFDD one that we talked about for EV was mentioned to me on an assessment last week. And the contractor in question was glad to see some clarification on it. However, he's been trying to upsell AFDD devices a little bit in his business and recommending them, which again is was a recommendation, just a general recommendation when carrying out and working, not non-HMO, non-student, but just trying to upsell them. But he was grateful for the clarification on it.
Yeah.
And as Keith said earlier, there are some organisations, some people we go and see in the Bradford area who are doing over and above, really, and implementing the use of AFDDs in quite a lot of their properties where they're not required by 7671 as yet. Some of these buildings are masonette blocks. They're not classed as the high risk as it is now, isn't it? It's not high rise. That's changed that definition. That's another change in Amendment 4, isn't it? The wording of HRRB. But they're decided to take it upon themselves to install them anyway for socket outlet circuits in these masonette blocks. So it's interesting to see some larger organisations maybe trying to future-proof these properties when they're doing this already expensive work. So
yeah, and I think it's one of those things, isn't it, that as we see the newer protective devices becoming more and more cost effective, shall we say, then they'll get used more and more. It was, it's very similar with, I can remember when we started off with one RCD in the board, then we had a dual RCD board. Now it's common to see RCBOs throughout. So yeah, it's
very much akin to that, the RCD thing. I remember in the early 90s that in my region, some of the people are careful with the money. been quite astounded at how expensive RCBOs were back then, which they were. But obviously, as we see now, there's much more budget version, cheap manufacturers. The cost is very negligible between installing a board with full RCBO protection rather than dual RCCBs. It's really a little bit becoming more of a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Not that they can't comply with the regulations, but there's so many reasons why for division of installation and earth leakage currents, or cumulative earth leakage currents, why you would favour RCBOs. It will be the same with AFDDs in time, as you say, as they become more widely used.
Yeah.
The manufacturing costs will reduce, won't they?
Yeah, so, very much so. The advantages very quickly outweigh the cost differential. There's a couple more. One definitely that we'll be able to fit in. So, if the DNO as a TNS system has exceeded the ZE reading, is it up to them to repair, or can they refuse to repair it and instead ask the client to supply their own earth spike, so effectively convert it to a TC system? So this is a common question we get asked. I think the first thing to say is that the TNS ZE value of 0.8 isn't a threshold that the DNOs have to achieve. It's a value that's used for design purposes. So it may well be that the actual ZE is greater than 0.8, but if the DNO, for example, could prove that it's constant, then they're maybe not going to get too concerned about it. If you as the electrical contractor can prove that it has deteriorated because you've got an installation certificate or a condition report that shows it was a much lower value and then over time it's got higher, that's great information to give to the DNO, and then they will get involved. Ultimately, I think, as Stuart, when we talked about a previous question, if they've provided an earth to the installation, then they have a requirement to maintain that earth. But it's one of those ones that they don't have to achieve the 0.8, and if it were a TNCS, they don't have to achieve the 0.35. Those values are typical values for design purposes. So yeah, don't be too surprised if you tell them it's slightly higher, 0.85, and they're not concerned. If it's that, they would be concerned if you said, well, 2 years ago it was 0.7 and now it's 1.4, because that would give them an indication that there's perhaps a breakdown of the cable or an issue. So the value on its own, of course, unless it's gone sky high, if it's hundreds of ohms, and so therefore you're not meeting the ZS of your overcurrent protective devices anymore, then that's something that they would take seriously, because, as we said, they've got to maintain an earth if they've provided it. They can't just turn around and say, no, you've got to TT it. That's not what the supply regulations talk about. We've had an influx of questions at the end, which we'll scoop up. I do apologise, we're not going to be able to get round to them all now. But yeah, just on that one, it's quite a common question that we get both on TNS and TNCS systems, where somebody's gone to perhaps do some additions and alterations and they've found that the ZE is greater than the typical values given.
Yeah. And obviously, Sam, that can have an implication on design of final circuits. Yeah. But the DNO won't do anything about it, particularly on a TNS if it's exceeding 0.8, but a little bit, 0.86. Yeah. It can then have an implication on the design of your final circuits to achieve compliance with the table 41.3 or whatever that device might be. And that's the knock-on effect, Keith, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They'll ask the DNO, will be asking whether it's stable as well. So they may even ask you to go back and take another reading at a different time of the day or a different day. And if it varies quite a lot, then they will come out. But they're not. We do get a lot of TT systems, especially in the Essex area, that are TT systems that have been converted to TNCS at the telegraph pole or the supply pole, and they are sometimes you're lucky if you get 0.35. You'll be getting 0.39, 0.4, and that is what the DNO is saying. Well, that's all you're getting. So take it from there. That's what you're having.
Yeah.
But don't just take it into consideration. Oh, well, I'll put an RCD on it. It'll all be all right. That's not quite how we design something.
Yeah, because you know if it is deteriorating and that ZE value is increasing, you need to ask why, because even putting an RCD on it might mean you've got the required disconnection times today, but maybe not tomorrow if things are changing. So yeah, it's not a solution, but you need to involve the DNO if it is a DNO earth to the installation. Okay, just a couple of things to say. If you are not currently certified with the NIC but are interested, perhaps you're just starting out, then please do go to the website to have a look at the schemes, in particular electrotechnical schemes that we offer. Training wise, we offer a wide range of in-classroom, virtual and online courses. So again, please do look. We've got next week we're up at ELEX in Harrogate, which is on the 14th, Thursday the 14th and Friday the 15th. So if you are in the Harrogate area, please do come along and see us. As part of ELEX Harrogate, we're also doing a couple of Amendment 4 talks each day. So they are only short, they're half an hour sessions, but they are CPD accredited. So you could sit in and listen on those. And we will have the NICEIC stand. So please do come and speak to us. We will be back the first Thursday of June, so that's June the 4th again at 8 o'clock. So yeah, apologies, we had a bit of a rush of questions there at the end that we're not going to get around to answering tonight, but we'll hold those over for next time if we don't use them for the social media questions of the week. Any final comments from you, Stuart?
Not particularly, just obviously to the contractors out there to try and familiarise themselves with Amendment 4 changes and keep up the good work.
Yeah.
That we're regularly seeing from vast majority of our contractors. Keep up the standards. Brilliant. That's what we want to see.
Yeah. And Keith?
Yeah, I'd say the same, Sam. I'd just say, look, the guys, just to make sure that you're up to speed. In fact, have a look at the 4 webinars, Sam, that the NIC have just put out on Amendment 4. They're all on demand. I think they're all on demand now. They're all very good. And again, it's some CPD that's going to be good to have in the back of your mind, that you're aware of what's going on after or sometimes before October the 15th.
Yeah.
So good luck to them all.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, and thanks and thanks to Stuart and Keith for supporting our event tonight as well. Much appreciated. And yeah, if we don't get to see you at Harrogate at ELEX next week, then hopefully you'll join us again next month. That would be Thursday, June the 4th at 4 o'clock. We'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.